Welcome to a new year. And the new year started off with some big news. We have, of course, Minnesota collapsing with the great big fraud schemes and Tim Walz in trouble. We have the capture of Nicolas Maduro from Venezuela. Many different things happening across the board. But one of the things that I want us to think about for a moment, and that is the election of Mayor Mamdani in New York City. And this is interesting because it does show us what the end game is for the Democratic Party. This is the end game. And I want to say right up front that socialism has been a practice or implemented in part in the Democratic Party, particularly from the time of Woodrow Wilson. And this is the end game. But I want to talk about socialism and Islam. Then I want to turn attention for a few moments to say this or to ask this question, and that is, why should a preacher such as myself be opposed to socialism? Why should we even log in on the issue of socialism? So let's think about all of that for just a few moments, beginning with Mayor Mamdani. I want to pick up on a phrase or a statement that was made by the liberal Leslie Marshall on a Fox News program during the day. She talked about Mamdani, and she said, but at the end, I hope he does well. I hope he does well. Now, that's a very nice sounding phrase. That is something that we expect people to say, just like, Obama will. Okay, Obama's in there. I hope he does well. But it depends upon how you define success. For Leslie Marshall to say, I hope he's successful, well, how do you define success, Leslie Marshall? Does it mean carrying out the programs that he preached? Does it mean more freedom for the people of New York City? Does it mean more or less control by the government? Recognizing the fact that the more government control there is, the less freedom there is with individuals. Just take, for example, income inequality. That's one of the big things that all of these socialists, aka Democrats, run on. Income inequality. The question that they don't ask is, why is income unequal to begin with in the United States? They assume, and they want you to assume, that it all has to do with the big government and the white people in the government controlling what's going on, and therefore there's income inequality. They don't ever want anybody to ask the question, does it have anything to do with personal choices? Is it because that people in power are putting down the little man? Is it because the people in power are putting down minorities? Or is it the case, possibly, that people are making personal choices, and particularly in the minority communities? It is hard for me to believe that anyone would go along with the idea that it is the big government controlled by whites that putting down the minorities, and that's why we have income inequality, especially in light of the fact that President Obama was elected as a black man in the presidential office, and there are many minorities in the Congress. It's hard for me to believe that people would even continue to buy into that. That is, the reason is that there's income inequality, is some kind of disparity or some kind of discrimination against minorities. Now, number two question is, regarding this income inequality, what is government to do about it? What is government to do? Mamdani ran on the idea of income inequality, but what are we to do? What is government to do? What is the suggestion? The suggestion only is, with those of socialists, and that's what he claims he is for the government, by its own power, to redistribute the monies. It assumes, of course, that those who have money, who have wealth, have it because of the unjustness in the practices, unjustness of the system. So how are we going to redistribute it? How are we going to remanage it? Well, the only way that can be remanaged of any kind of thing is to steal money from the wealthy and give to the poor. That's why the wealthy, predictably, are leaving New York. That's why they're leaving California. Because the bottom line thought of the Democratic Party, which is perfectly in line with socialists and communists, is that Inequality, as far as income is concerned, is due only to the fact that the minorities or the poor people have been discriminated against by the majority culture. That's their only answer. So in order to rectify that, they're going to steal money from those who have and give money to those who do not have. Now, here's another thought about it. Exactly where's the line for those who have and those who have not? That is, I should say, where's the line of those who are wealthy and those who are not wealthy? Those wealthy ones from whom the government should steal and give to the other ones. Where's the line? Well, that's arbitrary as well. Now, let me take it aside here and note something else. And that is what's going on in Minnesota and apparently in many other democratically run and perhaps Republican-run states as well is gigantic fraud schemes. This is the fraud that's going on. And I'll tell you one thing, it is difficult for me as a taxpayer to go out and get a job and get 2 and 3 jobs. I've had 4 jobs at one time in order simply to pay the taxes, the income taxes, April 15th. And I know a lot of other people do. There are many restaurants I go into, and there are middle-aged women, there are grandmothers that are waiting tables because frequently they have to meet their own tax burden, so they don't want to make too much money because now they're going to be taxed. So now they have to work more, so they work 2 and 3 jobs in order to pay the taxes. All this is going on while Minnesotans are being robbed and Americans are being robbed by the Somalis in Minnesota. I'll tell you, it angers the American taxpayer that they should have to pay for all that fraud. I think that they ought to give it back to us. That's what they ought to do. It's another story for another day. Let's go back to Mamdani for just a moment. Mamdani claims, of course, he's a socialist. Now, he is, of course, the first, not just the youngest, but the first Muslim, South Asian, African-born New York City mayor. He's the first one who claims, that is an avowed socialist, to make that central to his campaign. No other ones, such as de Blasio, also are socialists, but they try to hide it just a little bit. But this is how socialism works. It gets out into the open, and finally, people embrace it. And it used to be socialism was an ugly word, but no longer. For 100 years, the left has preached socialism under the name of progressivism. Progressivism is nothing more than socialism. Big government, Washington, D.C., making decisions for the private individual. That's what socialism is. And only now are they taking the masks off. So Democrats are so much on board with the idea of redistribution. They're now wearing the name socialist openly and declaring themselves communists. Not only are they completely ignorant about the history of socialism and communism, but they're ignorant about what is a real moral standard, because socialism violates the very basis of morality. We'll talk about that in a moment. I think it is interesting that Mamdani also thanked socialist Bernie Sanders. This is interesting, given that Bernie Sanders' behavior while running for president in 2020. It was then that his field organizer, Kyle Jurek, was caught on video talking about burning cities, putting political opponents, including liberals, in gulags, shooting them and setting them alight. And what was Bernie Sanders' response? He said his leadership was neither to fire nor denounce Jurek, but to dismiss the controversy as political gossip. That's what you have on the left. Now, anything like that on the right, anybody who had, there's anything that was any kind of odor like that at all surrounding any candidate, they would have been sunk before they began the campaign. But this is Bernie Sanders. This is socialism. They are crooked and they're wicked, and the whole concept of socialism, to take from some and give to the others, is absolutely immoral. Let's talk about this inclusivity for a moment. Mamdani hit upon his victory speech or his inauguration speech many expected themes, and he preached unity and inclusivity while playing up New York City's multicultural and a varied culture. He said, for example, that the authors of the city's story will speak Pashto, Mandarin, Yiddish, and Creole. What is this? It's cultural confusion. The reason that people want a single language in the United States is to have a united culture. That's what the United States is. It's a united culture. But this idea of inclusivity is a divisive culture. And you want to see what divisive cultures do? Just go over to Bosnia and you can see how the cultures are divided, and it's divided upon language and racial barriers. That's exactly what's happening, and that's what they want. That's what the left desires. But I want particularly to think about, number 4, big government socialism and communism that Mamdani preached. He, of course, touted it in his acceptance speech, in his inauguration day ceremony. It's interesting that President Bill Clinton famously and disingenuously said, in 1996, he said, the era of big government is over. That's interesting because that shows you not only was it a lie because they were interested in expanding government, but at that time in 1996, the Democrats had to hide their idea of big government under the concept of, well, smaller government. We're going to go back to a more streamlined government, and the era of big government is over. They had to say that. They had to lie that way because the American people reject them. Now we've come so far that Mamdani says just openly and brazenly, yeah, we're socialists, we're communists, and that's the way it is. So Bill Clinton helped pave the way, as well as all the Democrats have, all the way back to the time of Woodrow Wilson. If you don't think that's the case, then I say that you need to go back and look at history, what has happened from Woodrow Wilson, FDR particularly, and then Lyndon Johnson, and on, all the way through President Bill Clinton. But Mamdani was not posturing. He actually proclaimed in his speech, he didn't have to posture, quote, to those who insist that the era of big government is over, hear me when I say this. No longer will City Hall hesitate to use its power to improve New Yorkers' lives. And here he gets a round of applause. It's almost as if the American people have been put to sleep, at least New Yorkers have, been put to sleep as to what really works as far as government is concerned, and what is it that frustrates the freedom of men except big government. He goes on to say, we have turned to the private sector for greatness, this is his complaint, while accepting mediocrity from those who serve the public. We will ensure, he promised, that government is no longer solely the final recourse for those struggling. I suppose he meant it will be the first recourse. So included in that are such things as universal child care. How are you going to fulfill universal child care except, oh yeah, that's right, tax the rich? The wealthiest few, as he puts it. They're the ones who are going to leave because people are going to vote with their feet. How about the buses? He said they're going to be fast and free. I think it's just fascinating that people who come from countries who have been behind the Iron Curtain or who have lived in socialistic countries and have had public services in such poor condition, and then they come here and they say, wow, this is really great, but we're now running as fast as we can, at least in New York, to socialize everything and become just like the failed policies in Eastern Germany and other countries in Europe. It's absolutely astounding to me. And how about this one? Freezing rent. Mamdani said, okay, we're going to freeze rent. What's going to happen? Well, the supply will disappear. Remember Jimmy Carter said we're going to freeze gasoline prices? What happens? Well, it collapsed. That is, the productivity collapsed. The supply disappeared because they froze the prices, and therefore you have shortages. So what's going to happen? Well, shortages is what's going to happen. Let's just talk about collectivism for just a moment. Collectivism. What is collectivism? Collectivism, of course, that's what Mamdani is all about. They've existed as distinct from one another. And he says, we will draw the city closer. We will replace the frigidity of rugged individualism. Now, here's a statement, with the warmth of collectivism. This is Mamdani touting collectivism. If the people of New York yearn for solidarity, then let this government foster it. End of quote. What is exactly collectivism? Once again, astonishing that people have been so and mal-educated in American schools that we don't even understand collectivism and how it defrauds mankind, destroys freedom, actually enslaves individuals, and refuses to recognize the rights of an individual. For example, collectivism. Here's Stephen Gabriel this is a definition. Collectivism is defined as the theory and practice that makes some sort of group, rather than the individual, the fundamental unit of political, social, and economic concern. In theory, collectivists insist that the claims of groups, associations, or the state must normally supersede the claims of individuals. Collectivism is about groups, not individuals, group rights, not individual rights. Fred Miller, professor, says this: collectivism treats society as if it were a superorganism existing over and above its individual members, and which takes the collective in some form, tribe, race, or state, to be the primary unit of reality and standard of virtue. And we can go on and on with these kind of quotations. I have just many of them here. Here's another one from Ayn Rand. Collectivism means the subjugation of the individual to a group. Whether to a race, class, or state does not matter. Collectivism holds that man must be chained to collective action and collective thought for the sake of what is called the common good. So what is it basically? It is to say that there is no such thing as an individual right. We have come 180 degrees from the Constitution and from the Declaration of Independence, which for the first time in world history declared that rights are given to individuals by God, and the government is simply to protect those rights. And now we have Mamdani, the collectivist, the socialist, the communist, who says we're going to go to a collectivist society in which it is group rights and no longer individual rights. Now that brings me to my second question. And the second question I wanted to talk about for a few moments is, why should Christians and why should a preacher such as myself oppose socialism? Well, we've just answered it in part for what we've just seen, because socialism is collectivism that is no longer recognizing individual rights. It is so sad that modern America has been trained to compartmentalize their lives by placing religion and worshiping in the church house of privacy of the home as separate and distinct from politics. Politics is thought to be what one does when you go to the ballot box, and never should these two ideas meet. That's conventional wisdom. It's further supposed that ideas such as socialism, communism, statism, collectivism, or their variants are merely political theories that have no bearing on religious teaching, or more than that, that biblical teaching does not touch such ideas. Ladies and gentlemen, that's so shallow and so ill-informed, and having not given any thought, apparently, to the biblical world view. Let's just look at the Bible for a moment. Christian truth is one organism. It has a unity and coherence, the parts of which cannot be arbitrarily removed without doing violence to the whole. Or as one great Christian writer put it, James Orr, he said this, quote, "He who with his whole heart believes in Jesus as the Son of God is thereby committed to much else besides. He is committed to a view of God, to a view of man, to a view of sin, to a view of redemption, to a view of the purpose of God in creation and in history, and it is found only in Christianity." End of quote. Think about that view of man. The view of man is that man is created as an individual in God's sight, in the image of God, Genesis chapter 1, 26 and 27, and sin is caused by man's free will. Sin and the things that take place in society, that is, the negatives that occur in society, they do not come about because of the social structure. They come about because of man's poor choices, sinful choices. This is why preachers, Christians, should be interested, and must be, if they understand the Bible correctly, to oppose socialism, communism, and oppose, of course, people such as Mayor Mamdani, who claims to be a collectivist, socialist, and a communist.